All right, Mom, here we are in July of 2014. Time for some stories. And we're in North Branford at Evergreen Woods, your apartment here. And we've been talking during this family visit time about your family's homes in New Hampshire. So, can you say some more about the Furnace home and?
Well, I believe it was the Bank of Sandwich, and I can't make much sense out of the Sandwich Bank. With the living room. When I knew it, it was a living room, a big living room with a fireplace and kitchen and shed for wood for the wood stove on which Esther and Ruth cooked, and their mother before them. And for me as a little girl, it was just a place where I romped with all my girl cousins, who were Ruth Ann, Timmy, and Mary Ellen McQuaid, and Nancy and Sue Hurley.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it got too many people and too close for my parents, who, my father by then was doing very well at Carbide, and they could afford to go to Ball Peak, which they did, and build a house. And by the time I was 12, I was living, before that, in the house at Ball Peak overlooking the 18th hole fairway. And I had gone to camp for 3 years in Massachusetts, Camp Ogons.
How's that?
Camp Ogons. And
how's that spelled?
Ogontz. And it was, until my last year, it was fun. And then I was too old for it, or it just wasn't working anymore. And
So by that time you'd been living up there for, or summering up there?
Summering somewhere in New Hampshire from sometime in June to just before school started. In the fall, in September. It didn't start then in August the way it does now.
Right. And were you up there with your mom, and were your brothers up there at all, or were they too old and off doing their own thing? And was Dids working most of the time?
Dids was working during the week and living at home in Plandome, and then came up on weekends. And the first time he met Deaver, we drove to Meredith to meet his train, which came in on Saturday morning. Slept on the train overnight, and Meredith, and it was
This is
fun.
Meredith, New Hampshire?
Meredith, New Hampshire,
Okay.
on Winnipesaukee. And Deaver and I went early enough to stop at a diner and have blueberry muffins, and I remember how good they were. And then we picked up my father, and he sat in the front seat with Deaver, who was so nervous and so excited to meeting my father, that he drove right up the back of the car in front of us because he was concentrating.
Right off the jump.
Which was not a good way to earn the approval of
In the first minute of meeting him?
Well, in the first 10 minutes of meeting him.
Oh my goodness.
And so he was terribly embarrassed, but we hadn't done any real damage.
Oh.
And until my father retired, that was the way he used Bald Pete. He came on weekends.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose after he was 65, he just was there all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And Chester and Thelma drove them up. They came in 2 cars. Oh, could Thelma have driven the other car? I can't imagine how they got the second car there. I don't think Thelma drove.
And Chester and Thelma were?
Chester and Thelma were the black couple who had worked for them since I was 4. I remember when they came in Douglaston to work for us, and I loved them dearly. Chester because he was so bad, and Thelma because she was so good and so smart. And Chester was a performer, and he was a party man. He was sporting life. And my mother didn't think much of him. And he would get insulted by New York policemen and wouldn't do what they said if they didn't say please. And my father and I admired that very much in him, that he was so prideful. And my mother did not admire it at all. So.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and you want more about Sandwich?
Yeah, Sandwich and the...
Down the hill a little bit from the Sandwich house was the village graveyard, and it was on sort of a hump in the ground. There were pastures between the house and it, and then it had been made into a hill, and the good people of Sandwich were buried there. And we used to, the other little girls and I used to play there and play tag around the graveyards, and Deaver and I considered being buried there ourselves, only it would be hard for our children. And the great appeal of Sandwich was that Peg Furness, who was my mother's sister-in-law, the second wife of my Uncle George, and Ruth and Esther and their husbands and families.
Who were your mother's other sisters?
Who were her other sisters.
Ruth McQuaid and Esther Hurley.
And Esther Hurley. And was that all along Route 109, New Hampshire Route 109, their houses were scattered.
Uh-huh.
And so it was a largely family life that we led there until my parents went to Bald Pete. And you asked if Phil and Choate came. I'm sure they did. And they weren't of much concern to me at that point.
Yeah.
Choate was probably working in Lake Placid then, and Phil was a young married man with children.